Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming today to this Susman lecture on behalf of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives. I want to thank you all so much for being with us today. I'm Gina Horman, a longtime member of ALBA's board and executive committee. ALBA's mission is to preserve the legacy of the volunteers who fought fascism in Spain. And if you're joining our events for the first time, please be sure to check our website for more information and upcoming events. You'll find links to our website in the chat, and also be sure to sign up to receive our fabulous quarterly publication, The Volunteer. Today's event, featuring the intrepid human rights activist Joyce Horman, is our annual Susman Lecture. This lecture is named in honor of Abraham Lincoln Brigade veteran and co-founder of the archive, William Bill Susman, born in 1915 and passed in 2003. And I'm delighted to count among our audience today members of Bill's family. This series of free lectures has presented in-depth material relating to the Spanish Civil War, human rights, and topics related to the legacy of the vets every year since 1998. ALBA today would also like to thank and acknowledge the Center for Constitutional Rights, who has co-sponsored this event with us. ALBA is pleased to offer our programs always free of charge, but of course this is only possible through the generosity of our donors. So please do consider making a donation at the links which you can find in the chat. This event is going to be recorded for later viewing and reviewing on our YouTube channel, where you'll also find recordings of other of our events. And there will be an opportunity for questions from the audience. So start thinking about your questions now, and we'll soon invite you to put them in the chat. As a scholar myself and teacher of state terror in Latin America and Spain, I'm really delighted and really moved to be able to moderate and introduce this event today, in which our invited lecturer, the human rights activist Joyce Horman, will speak about her experiences in Chile, as well as those of her husband, the journalist Charlie Horman, who went missing in 1973 when the couple was living in Santiago. Her search for what happened to him was chronicled in the fabulous, famous, award-winning 1982 film Missing, in which she was portrayed by Sissy Spacek. Charles's murder has resulted in years of human rights activism for Joyce, seeking justice for this crime. Joyce created the Horman Truth Foundation, which fights for her continued research and prosecution for those involved with her husband's murder, which included Augusto Pinochet. Joyce travels the country as a guest speaker, telling students and others about her experience of living in Chile during the 73 coup. Joyce is a long-term honorary member of the board of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archive, and we're really delighted that she is among us on our board. She came to ALBA with a sense of gratitude for the bravery and courage which the brigade's heroes brought to the brutal fight against Franco's fascist violence. And she says in a note to me that she has recently come to understand how important it is to have a record of what happened to Charlie that is accessible, credible, and truthful. Joyce feels we're in a period, as I think we all share the sentiment, of encroaching authoritarianism, which requires us to document our true reality for the day when those responsible for this period of lawlessness and intimidation can be called to justice. So I'm going to pass the microphone over to Joyce, and Joyce, take it away. Thank you so much for being here. We're really honored.
Thank you, dear friends. I do thank the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives for inviting me to talk about my experience with dictatorship in Chile. I also thank the Brigade Archives for remembering and educating us about the heroes that went to Spain to fight Franco's fascism. Some came home, but many did not. I also thank the Center for Constitutional Rights for their important past legal support to the Horman family's search for justice. My husband, Charlie Horman, was killed in September 1973 in the aftermath of General Augusto Pinochet's US-backed violent overthrow of Chile's democratically elected government of Salvador Allende. Charlie was a filmmaker, a journalist. The 1982 movie Missing, directed by Costa Gavras, tells the story of our search for Charlie during Pinochet's chaotic military takeover. I met Charlie in France in 1964. He just graduated from Harvard, and I was traveling with a friend from college. We married in June 1968, and seeking to travel and to spend more time together in 1971, we left New York City in a camper. We spent several months traveling through Latin America and finally arrived in Santiago in the spring of 1972. There, we found that the enthusiasm and energy of the Chileans whose lives had been improved by Allende's programs was palpable, as recounted by Ariel Dorfman, a former advisor to Allende. The day Allende was elected, the euphoria in the streets was electric. When Allende, who became president on November 3rd, 1970, said he would be El Compañero Presidente, the crowds roared. By the time we arrived, Allende had nationalized Chile's copper mines and large factories, provided daily milk for every child, and made low-cost food and housing available for the workers. There were extensive programs to bolster literacy education, and childcare. Charlie and I looked for work. I briefly worked at the Forestry Institute, computerizing productivity reports for the industry. Later, I joined two roommates to animate a children's story written by Charlie called The Sunshine Grabber. Charlie started volunteering with a group of Americans who published a newsletter in Spanish known as FIN on anti-war and social justice struggles in the US and around the world. He was also doing translations for the Ford Foundation and scripting a documentary about Chile's economic history. He soon started researching the October 1970 kidnapping and murder of the head of Chile's army, René Schneider, a man loyal to the Chilean Constitution and democracy. His CIA-backed removal was an effort to prevent Allende from taking office. That move was part of the Nixon administration's actions to overturn Allende's election and pressure Chile economically. They ratcheted up their verbal attacks and direct actions after the election, and once Allende was installed, they did not let up. Kissinger, Nixon's national security advisor, said this famous quote, "I don't know why we need to stand by and watch a country go communist due to the irresponsibility of its people. The issues are much too important for the Chilean voters to be left to decide for themselves," unquote. Once Allende became president on November 3rd, Nixon ordered covert operations to make the economy scream. Money was funneled to the right-wing National Party and the center-right Christian Democratic Party to boost opposition activities. Funds also went to Chile's main newspaper, El Mercurio, which provided misinformation concerning the success of Allende's programs while spreading fear it was a communist takeover. Allende's enemies tried to muster legal reasons to impeach him, but the March 1973 midterm elections showed his support increasing. Sabotage of his government, however, kept growing as well. And by September 1973, many thought a coup attempt was likely, but that it would be nonviolent, ultimately leading to a centrist Christian democratic return to office. On the morning of September 11th, 1973, however, we heard jets soaring over the city and radio stations broadcast that they were bombing the Moneda, the seat of government where Allende was in his office. Tanks roamed the thoroughfares, including near our home. We heard shots all day, and a 24-hour curfew was declared. The radio instructed Chileans to turn in all foreigners to the police. Buses and trains were stopped and the telephones did not work. That day, Charlie was on the coast in Viña del Mar with Terry Simon, our friend who had come to visit from New York City. There they met U.S. military officials staying in the same hotel, who expressed satisfaction about how smoothly the coup went. They met a U.S. official who arranged for his boss, Captain Ray Davis, chief of the U.S. military group in Chile, to give them a lift back to Santiago in a couple days. Captain Davis let Charlie and Terry off in downtown Santiago late afternoon, the Saturday after the coup, the Tuesday coup. Since the curfew was about to begin, they booked into a nearby hotel. On Sunday morning, Charlie and Terry returned to our house, and we all decided to try to leave Chile. On Monday morning, Charlie and Terry went to the airlines offices to look for tickets. I left the house with our roommate, Luis, to check on friends' safety and buy some groceries. We saw troops patrolling the downtown area and bonfires of books, activities that continued into the night. Luis and I could not get home before the curfew and spent the night in a cold cement stairwell. When we returned to the house in the morning, we found it ransacked. Charlie and Terry were not there. Our landlord, who lived next door, told us we should leave because the soldiers might come back. Luis and I went to Luis's friend's house. I soon learned from other friends that they had been called by Chilean military intelligence, asking about a gringo with a beard and how he happened to have their telephone number in his directory. It frightened them. The next morning, I went to the U.S. consulate and told them Charlie had been taken by Chilean military intelligence, telling them about the phone call that my friends had received. Consul staff said the Chilean government had not reported anything about Charlie to them and asked me to list all the things that had been taken from the house. That was the beginning of many weeks of lack of interest, poor treatment, and stonewalling from U.S. officials. I asked if I could stay at the consulate as I had nowhere else to go, but they refused, saying they had no accommodations. Through them, however, I was able to locate Terry, who had registered at the consulate the day before, thank goodness. She had gone to stay at a hotel close to the airline offices after checking with them. When I found her, I told her about Charlie, and we wept together for the danger he was in. But I was able to stay with her. Terry suggested we contact Captain Davis since he had offered help should it be needed. In an interview in his office, he questioned us about Charlie's disappearance. He also invited us to his home for dinner the next evening, since the head of Chile's Navy was going to be there and might be able to give some information about Charlie. The Navy chief didn't appear, however, so we learned nothing. After staying overnight because of the curfew, Captain Davis provided an escort for me to my home to collect a few belongings. While there, the landlord appeared and said that a neighbor across the street had seen Charlie and some boxes taken away by a truckload of soldiers. She also said her daughter had taken a cab at that time and had seen the truck turn into the National Stadium gates. The soccer stadium had been turned into a detention and torture center after the coup. It soon became clear that Terry should return to New York City as soon as possible. If what she and Charlie learned in Vienna about likely U.S. support for the coup was what got Charlie picked up, then she was in danger as well. I made an appointment with the U.S. ambassador. I asked him to go to the stadium and look for Charlie. He said, "What do you want me to do, Mrs. Horman? Look under all the bleachers?" It was obvious that the U.S. Embassy was not looking for Charlie and instead was accepting the Chilean claim that they had no knowledge of him. Shortly after, our friend Steve Volk was escorted to the morgue by the U.S. Vice Consul, where he found his friend Frank Tarugi dead from gunshot wounds. Frank, a student from Chicago and FEEN volunteer, had been taken from his home by the Chilean military with his roommate. Steve did not find Charlie. I called Ed Horman, Charlie's father, to inform him about the identification of Frank's body. I was relieved when I heard that Ed decided to travel to Chile. Ed was a stolid, dignified man who sincerely believed the U.S. officials would help us find Charlie. Ed checked us into a downtown hotel. The next day, we went to see the ambassador, who suggested that perhaps Charlie was in hiding from me. From me. Ed asked if they had checked the hospitals and offered that we would check them if they would provide a car and driver. We were again told the Chileans had assured them that they knew nothing of Charlie's whereabouts. Ed talked them into escorting him to the stadium, however, a day or so later, where he called to Charlie with a bullhorn, but there was no answer. After a few days, Ed and I had covered several hospitals without finding any trace of Charlie. Ed visited the Ford Foundation because Charlie had worked there, where he learned they had heard through diplomatic circles that Charlie had been killed in the stadium weeks earlier. Ed called the consulate to tell them what he learned. The consulate said they would check on it. The Chilean police had requested that I go to their station, and Ed accompanied me. They wanted more details about Charlie, presumably to search for him, though they doubtless already knew he was dead. While there, Ed received a call from the U.S. officials confirming that the Chilean military had killed Charlie in the stadium. But for nearly 2 decades, U.S. officials denied having told Ed this, publicly accepting the Chilean military's claim that Charlie's body had been found in the street, killed by leftists. Ed and I left Santiago soon after. On the long plane ride home, I felt paralyzed. I couldn't grasp that I was going back to New York without Charlie. At the airport, Charlie's mother, Elizabeth, hugged me, and together we wept. Months later, we went to Washington to testify before Congress about how we were treated and to ask why Charlie had not been protected by the U.S. Embassy. It was their job. By spring 1974, Ed started working with attorney Peter Weiss and his brilliant team of lawyers at the Center for Constitutional Rights, CCR, to sue Henry Kissinger and others in the State Department to find out how much they knew about Charlie's death and when they knew it. The suit was filed in 1976. CCR used the Freedom of Information Act to request documents, but most of the documents they eventually received were so heavily redacted that only a few words were visible, except the words state secrets written in many margins. CCR's requests to question State Department employees were denied. After 4 years, our case was dismissed without prejudice, meaning if more information became available, the case could be reopened. Excuse me a minute. The dictatorship's tentacles crossed borders to silence the voices of Chileans in exile who were condemning Pinochet's violence internationally. In September 1974, Carlos Prats and his wife were car bombed in Argentina, Buenos Aires. Prats had been forced out as head of the Chilean army right before the coup. A year later, 75, Bernardo Leighton, former cabinet member, and his wife survived an assassination attempt, but in Rome. But his wife was permanently disabled and he was severely wounded. Then, in September 1976, Orlando Letelier, Allende's foreign minister, and an American colleague were car bombed in the streets of Washington, D.C., by a team of assassins sent by Pinochet's government. How did they ever get by U.S. security agents? Letelier had originally been arrested with other Allende cabinet members after the coup, but a year later, international pressure had secured his release, and he was sent to the U.S. American Thomas Hauser wrote the book, The Execution of Charles Horman, An American Sacrifice, an evocative book whose vivid portraits inspired producers Eddie and Millie Lewis, Sean Daniels, and filmmaker Costa Gavras to develop the movie Missing. The film told the story of the search for Charlie in Pinochet's brutal dictatorship and also revealed human rights crimes committed against Chilean families. In the mid-1980s, Missing helped widen global consciousness of the horrors of Pinochet's dictatorship. Indeed, screening the film helped Chilean refugee communities abroad explain their struggle. Many films were made from the mid-1970s onward that internationally amplified discussion concerning the many human rights crimes and emotional and personal consequences of 17 years of dictatorship. These included movies by Patricio Guzman, Miguel Litin, Andres Woods, Carmen Castillo, Elizabeth Farnsworth, and Felipe Bustos Sierra. The Chilean international solidarity movement is widely considered one of the most effective and innovative of its times. Global groups work to support the resistance inside Chile, save lives of those detained by the military regime, and gain the release of political prisoners so they could go into exile. In 1988, under the terms of Pinochet's 1980 constitution, a plebiscite was called, and Chilean citizens were asked to vote yes or no to an extension of Pinochet's term as president. A huge campaign for the no was successful. An election was held a year later, which was the first step back toward democracy. Christian Democrat Patricio Aylwin, who was elected over the military's preferred candidate, served as president of Chile from 1990 to 1994. But Pinochet's 1980 constitution made him senator for life, and many of his cronies retained their positions of power. Also, an amnesty law prevented them from being prosecuted. Pinochet remained the head of the army. In 1998, Pinochet traveled to London for medical procedure. A Spanish magistrate, Baltazar Garzón, together with human rights lawyer Juan Garces, had been investigating human rights crimes committed against Spanish citizens by Pinochet's regime. When they heard Pinochet was in London, they put together an international arrest warrant, which was honored by Britain, and Pinochet was arrested in hospital. We all cheered. Pinochet's arrest was based on the legal principle of universal jurisdiction, which allows any state to prosecute individuals for certain egregious crimes, such as genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and torture, if the defendant has not been tried in his own country. This concept is based on the idea that these crimes are such offenses against the international community itself, it creates a universal moral and legal duty to ensure perpetrators are brought to justice to prevent impunity. It marked the first time judges had applied such a principle. Pinochet was detained under house arrest for a year and a half. The British law lords, roughly the equivalent of our Supreme Court, concluded in the end that, given the egregious nature of his crimes, Pinochet did not have sovereign immunity and therefore could be extradited to Spain, but only for crimes committed after 1988. You might ask why. Since the UN Convention on Torture was not incorporated into British law until then. But in the year 2000, the UK released Pinochet to return to Chile due to his poor health. Over the next 6 years, Chilean courts indicted Chilean courts indicted Pinochet for crimes against humanity as well as extensive financial fraud and corruption. He was placed under house arrest several times, but was never convicted before his death in 2006. In 1999, right after Pinochet's arrest, the Clinton administration released partially redacted State Department documents on the U.S. actions regarding Chile during the Allende period and during and after the coup. Among these documents was one suggesting the U.S. government had a hand in Charlie's death and that it should be investigated. In 2000, The Horman's Chilean lawyers Fabiola Letelier and Sergio Corvalan filed a wrongful death case on Charlie's behalf against Pinochet and other military officers. This suit was accepted by Judge Juan Guzman. It was difficult for him to get answers from the military about who did what, when, and where, but the judge's persistence brought important information forward. When Pinochet died in 2006, our case was transferred to a new judge, Jorge Zepeda. Frank Tarugi's case was joined to ours, and there were still many witnesses who could have been interviewed by Judge Zepeda, but for some reason were not. Finally, in 2011, Judge Zepeda indicted former U.S. Captain Ray Davis and two former Chilean intelligence officials, Pedro Espinosa and Rafael González Verdugo, for the murders of Charlie and Frank. Over the next several years, a Chilean court found that U.S. intelligence services had played a fundamental role in the 1973 murders. Espinosa and Gonzalez were sentenced to prison for their roles, the only ones still alive from the original case. This final judgment came a full 45 years after Charlie and Frank were abducted from their homes, tortured, and murdered. They were just two of way over 3,000 people who were brutally killed and disappeared during Pinochet's time rule. The dictatorship which I experienced was lawless and violent, with no checks on power and no compassion. The military abducted my husband Charlie with no legal process and then tortured him to death. The emotional shock lasted years, the grief lasted decades. Trying to find justice for this crime has been a long road. Today, we are witnessing the rise in authoritarianism here in the United States and abroad. Indeed, some actions that occurred in Chile before, during, and after the coup bear similarities to various developments in the United States today. In Chile, the military was the primary instrument of a widespread campaign of state-sponsored terror, surveillance, and repression. The U.S. has not experienced a military coup, and our military so far has respected the Constitution. The National Guard and the ICE units, however, are increasingly being imposed on cities with Democratic majorities that Trump has called war zones. Trump suggests that American cities be used for combat training, and masked ICE agents are already descending on some cities in full military gear. In Chile, the army chief was murdered to block Allende from taking office, and later top military officers were forced to resign, smoothing the way to a coup. In the U.S., dozens of top military officials have recently been removed from their positions, as well as the top lawyers who determine the legality of military actions. Chile had an active far-right Patria y Libertad militia before the coup, and in the States we saw the Proud Boys and similar groups largely responsible for the January 6, 2021 insurrection. In both countries, people perceived as the other have been targeted. In Chile, it was foreigners. In the US, it is now immigrants and criminals. In Chile, civil liberties were eliminated after the coup with widespread arrests, torture, imprisonment, murder, and disappearances. Here we have witnessed the arrest and deportation of thousands of undocumented immigrants and sometimes American citizens with no due process and at times even in direct violation of court orders. In Chile, the military junta controlled the media, closed opposition media, journalists were murdered and jailed. In the US, Trump works to intimidate and censor media companies through lawsuits, including suing the New York Times for $15 billion and threats to pull broadcast licenses and withdraw press credentials from reporters. In Chile, opposition leaders and activists were killed, jailed, tortured, and disappeared, while others went or were sent into exile. In the US, Trump is targeting people he considers his enemies, directing criminal indictments against former FBI Director James Comey and New York State Attorney General Letitia James. In Chile, democratic institutions were either systematically dismantled and purged or repurposed into instruments of state-sponsored repression and economic neoliberalism. The junta dissolved Congress and abolished the Constitution, concentrating power under Pinochet. In the US, Trump is gutting federal agencies, effectively hobbling government services. The Republican-controlled Congress is largely ceded power to Trump, effectively acceding to Trump's efforts to destroy the separation of powers that is fundamental to our form of government. The president is empowered by the Supreme Court and the GOP-controlled Congress. In Chile, Pinochet took over the universities, purged faculty and students, controlled curriculum, drastically reduced funding, and encouraged the growth of private universities. In the US, Trump is blocking federal funding to universities based on DEI, anti-Semitism, and lack of viewpoint diversity, seeking to control admissions and dictate the curriculum. In Chile, museums were censored and books burned. In the US, history is being censored in the Smithsonian and national parks, and book banning is on the rise. In Chile, there was widespread fear of imprisonment and death. Today in the US, immigrants and those perceived to be immigrants are fearful of arrest, abduction, and deportation. Elected officials and judges frequently receive death threats, and fear has permeated many law firms, universities, and even corporations, concerned that their actions or inactions will invite harm and retribution. Our constitutional rights are being taken away, eroding our democracy. Just as the Chileans could not imagine a violent coup, many Americans cannot imagine that our democracy can descend to the level of authoritarian rule. Normal checks and balances have been eroded, and unconstitutional actions only partially blocked, which is how our president's power grows. Strongman leaders do not just fade away. Hitler's rule lasted 12 years until World War II ended it. Franco, whom you all know, ruled Spain for 36 years until his natural death. Pinochet's dictatorship may have officially ended after 17 years with a plebiscite, but it took an international arrest warrant with house detention in the UK for 18 months and broad international condemnation of his human rights crimes to start prosecutions of him and his minions in Chile. The restoration of democracy is arduous and can take many years. Protection of our precious democracy requires that we call out the current lawlessness. Phone calls, letters, emails, and postcards to Congress and street protests demanding accountability and the protection of our constitutional rights are a must. Everyone remember October 18th, please. The fight to rebuild what has already been destroyed and the struggle to defend democracy and social justice is a long haul fight. We cannot remain silent. We must act. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Really great. Thank you so much for talking with us and such a timely and important topic. Okay. So, welcome everybody again. My name is Dennis Meany. I'm the executive assistant here at Alba, and I've been monitoring your questions. Please put them in we use the little web for those who are new, who have been joining us in the past. We're using the webinar format now, so you put your questions in the little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. It has a little Q and an A and then a little question mark on it. So that's how you know it's for questions. So put those in there and we'll try and answer as many as we can live here. I'll ask them to Joyce and Joyce well, for the best of our ability, answer them. So we're going to begin with, I think Leonard Lerman has a question for you, Joyce. Sort of a clarification. Why were Charlie and Frank tortured? Were they asked to name names of associates and refused? What were the circumstances around that? Or to the
I'm
best.
sorry, can you repeat that for me?
Why were Charlie and Frank tortured? Were they asked to name names of associates and refused? What were the circumstances around this, to the best of your knowledge?
I have no idea why they were tortured, but torture is usually used to get additional names and also activities, and I assume that's why.
Okay. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Leonard, for the question. I'll go to Ruth Needleman, also asked a question sort of about the end of the topic you were discussing. There was mass mobilization and organization in support of Allende, but it was not enough to save the government. What can we learn from that experience, in your opinion?
It's a tough one. What is the clearest to me is that Chileans did not believe they could have a violent coup in such a long-running democratic nation. So the lesson is we need to look at all of these activities and understand that they are meant to give our president extraordinary powers. And authoritarianism is a very near possibility.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Joyce. And thank you for the question. Just looking through all these now. Cassian Vaubel asks, have any U.S. officials ever apologized or expressed remorse over U.S. involvement in Charlie and Frank's death to you or publicly?
No. No, none of them have.
Oh, thank you, Kat. I appreciate the bluntness of your answer, and thank you for the question, Cassian. To the best from James Cambridge, what is known to the best of your knowledge, Joyce? What do we think we know about U.S. surveillance and monitoring of U.S. citizens that were active in support of Allende at the time? How long do we think that your husband was under surveillance by the government of the United States, at least in this instance?
Well, we did learn that Captain Davis had a surveillance program watching Americans and what they were doing. Charlie was driven home by Captain Davis. And I can only imagine that Captain was familiar because there was what was it called? A file. It turns out we found later there was a file on Charlie, and presumably the U.S. provided that file to the Chileans. This is, you know, from what we have learned over so many years, there's quite a bit of information, and I honestly am not sure how much surveillance we as Americans were under. But certainly when Charlie was given a ride home by Captain Davis, who asked him about his work and etc., there was a file that could be looked up and shared with Chileans if they wanted. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, James, for the question. I'll go. I want to try and get as many as possible. This is from Michael Whitney. This is just to you, Joyce. Your thoughts. What do you think of John Dinge's new book, With Chile in Our Hearts? Do you have any thoughts on that?
that's sort of off my topic
Okay.
today. Thank you so much. Maybe another day, but today I'm just talking about my experiences.
Okay. Um, do This is from Greta Berlin. So again, asking sort of about current times. Is the same setup now being fomented against Venezuela that was against Chile? Do you see continuities between the administration then's actions in Latin America and today? I guess another way to phrase that.
It's really quite extraordinary that the US government is just shooting at boats with no, and never providing any proof that these people were in fact running drugs or doing anything else illegal. And now I think I just heard that Trump has decided they're preparing for perhaps touching land in Venezuela. It sounds really horrible, but different. In Chile, it was mostly covert operations against the Allende, or the success of Allende's programs, and and also, of course, like I said, they gave money to the newspaper, the main newspaper, El Mercurio. So all sorts of stories about communist takeover were implanted in in that newspaper. I don't think we're doing that in Venezuela right now. So the circumstances are different, and I am quite worried that our government thinks it's okay to invade another country in Latin America.
Very concerning. Thank you, Joyce, and thank you for that question. This is from Esteban Creste. Again, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing any of your name. Please forgive me. I have this New York accent. It's very bad. How much of a role do you believe Operation Condor played in Charlie and Frank's deaths, to your knowledge? Was this?
I honestly, I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't have an answer for that.
Absolutely. J. Patrice McSherry just asked for some clarification, maybe that other people may have missed this too. But what was the official outcome of the case filed with Fabio and Sergio? What was the official verdict of these cases?
Well, those two people were convicted, and one was already in prison and received a longer sentence than the other one because of age and physicality, was arrested, was under house arrest. So that was the conclusion of that case.
Great. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Patrice, for that question. Looking, um, This is from Steve, question from Stephen Hopkins. Many thanks for this talk. Did you or Ed Horman have did you have input into the Costas Garvey film? Were you happy with the ultimate film? I don't know if that's a question. After I read the whole thing, is that one you'd like to answer here? It's okay if not.
No, that's fine. Ed was interviewed several times by Thomas Hauser, and so he was very generous with his time and his thinking about what had happened to his son, his only child. And Costa Gavras came to speak to us, and they invited us down to Mexico, which I think means that we felt comfortable with them and they felt comfortable with us in terms of the relationship to the book. And they asked us a few questions, but honestly, they took a lot from the book and a lot from other testimonies about what was going on in Chile at the time, and they made the movie impressively well, I think.
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, and thank you, Stephen, for that question. This is from Leslie Krebs. And this is just Joyce. Is there any effort in Chile today to get justice for others like Charlie and Frank who had disappeared? What are the ongoing measures for remembrance in Chilean society, if to the best of your knowledge?
No, I think the closure of the case in, what was it, 2011, was the end of our attempt to do more investigating in Chile. And so the answer to that is no. And additionally, I wish there had been some questions asked of the US Navy intelligence and other military intelligence units, but that did not happen.
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Leslie. Oh. I'm gonna go with this is sort of excuse me, a question from Russell Tenson. So I mean, this is like kind of a question about, you being in Chile beforehand and your read of the society. The question is, did neoliberalism and the Chicago Boys economic policies benefit Chile? When you and your husband were in Chile, did you feel that or did you feel that there were positive changes from the U.S. Economic policy?
Well, I'm not an economist, but they
Yeah.
certainly had a very heavy impact, and I'm not sure it certainly wasn't to the benefit of Allende's government.
Mhm. Thank you, Joyce. Yeah, let's see, anybody else? One. This is let me just see. Well, Jay, first name Jay, sort of just wants us to it says the following. Please discuss where you left off on similarities to then and now with these regimes. What do you predict will occur here in the short, medium, and long term in the US? Who, in your opinion, is driving the current state of our politics, and what is the long-term goal? I think just to rephrase that, yeah, what do you in the current, as you said, this current trajectory of, authoritarian governance in America, where do you see it going? If on the trajectories, if people don't, take your lessons to heart.
Well, I certainly think the Project 2025 had in mind to take over the government. And in order to add power to the executive, they had to weaken the government apparatus. And so we see so many government agencies, so many employees being fired, and so much function being lost. That certainly puts more power into the executive office And since the Congress is going along with and basically saying okay to everything that the executive office is spewing and proposing now, I feel there has to be a very big attempt on our part, yours and mine, to pull us back to a constitutionally lawful government. And I'm not quite, I don't have a plan except maybe to go on Saturday as a start to the No King's Day demonstration. It does seem like it's going to be very large, and I hope so. I hope it makes a difference. I hope it has a big impact.
Thank
And
you.
I'm grateful for all of the lawyers that have said, no, this is not legal. You can't do that. I mean, 2 times now, Portland, Oregon has been protected by judges who have said that's illegal. You can't do that. It does look like Chicago is suffering right now, and I'm hoping there are more judges who are going to stand up and declare that to be illegal as well. We are benefiting from good judgment, and we have to be careful to watch all of the new judges that might be approved by this administration. There is an elected official that they're refusing to sign in because that would release the Epstein files. I think there should be a rule against dragging your feet on installing newly elected members of Congress just so you don't have to reveal the big file, the Epstein file. Sorry, I think I'm dragging on a bit.
No, please, no. A wonderful, thank you, Joyce. That's wonderful, wonderful answer. And as some people in the chat are agreeing that this is important to draw inspiration from the mass demonstrations of Allende and connect them to No Kings and all that things,
I
those things
agree.
today. I'm going to spotlight our board member, Gina Herman, who you heard from before, who has a question for Joyce.
Hi, Joyce. I have a couple of questions for you. I just wanted to highlight for people that Philippe Sands, his book, 38 Lunde Street,
Thank you.
on impunity, Pinochet in England, and a Nazi in Patagonia. I think its
Very.
release date is the 23rd, perhaps, of this month. Joyce was kind enough to send me a copy from England. I can't recommend it enough. It's absolutely riveting. Sands as always has you on the edge of his seat, or
Thank
our seat rather, also on the edge of his seat as we watch him make connections between his family history, the history of the rat line, Nazis who found shelter and impunity in Latin America, and the Pinochet regime. And just the minute by minute descriptions of the way in which Pinochet was arrested is where I am now at the beginning of the book. It's absolutely riveting.
great. He's
But that,
actually,
go
I
ahead,
was
Joyce.
just going to say he's in New York and he's going to be at the 92nd Street Y on, I think, November 10th. He is probably leaving New York but coming back through. He is a wonderful speaker and wonderful to listen. This book is terrific. I also want to just mention there's a new biography out about Fabiola Letellier, our lawyer whom we adored, and that's also an important testimony as to what what lawyers and judges, the difference they make to these lawless activities. It's really quite impressive.
It is indeed, and the way in which Sands is able to make the story of the legal process, which could be so dry, actually so riveting and so engaging is really remarkable. And it brings me to a question that I just was hoping you could clarify. Um, which Chilean military personnel were convicted for the disappearance and murder of Frank and Charlie? I just wanted you to clarify that for us from I believe it was the 2011 case.
Well, the head of the DINA, his name for Espinosa, was convicted, but he was also already in jail for human rights crimes, convicted by some other cases. And Rafael Gonzalez Verdugo seems to have been I don't know, an intelligence officer for the Navy or the Air Force it was. And he is the one who actually was said he was in the room when they decided Charlie knew too much. And he's just a large character, and he's still alive, but quite old and infirm. And so he was put under house arrest. Those were the two people that were convicted, but originally there were more, 7 or 8 more. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering exactly right now.
I get that, and I think the last question that I wanted to ask you was, I admire you. We all admire you so much. It's a lifetime of activism. And for those of us who are looking for inspiration or words of fortitude during this really difficult time in the United States, what advice would you give us for, as you yourself said, the struggle for the long haul? What is it that motivates you, that keeps you in the fight? What lessons for activists do you have today?
I think we all have our own paths. I had a very specific one, and I relied heavily on a legal process. And the case against Kissinger was, I thought, an important case for us to bring, and so did Ed, and so did Liz. And so we worked with them, and thank goodness for the Constitutional for Center for Constitutional Rights. They really backed us up there. We were also, of course, absolutely elated when Pinochet was arrested. I mean, the joy that spread over Chilean victims and others that had settled in places in Europe and Australia and elsewhere. There was great joy when he was arrested. It's the first time any dictator has been arrested and detained for 18 months. So it was a huge victory. And I think all of the people who were working for some justice for their victims, for the crimes against their families and other victims, they were working through the legal system. So I place a great deal of my hope and my prayers for strength to all of the legal lawyers and judges and everyone who adheres to the law and tries to enforce it. It's getting a little tougher in the US right now, but thank goodness there are those who say that is illegal. And if we just hear it and know it and then act on that, it's it boosts my spirit.
Thank you for that response.
Sure.
Thank you, Gina, and thank you, Joyce. I'm going to go to our executive director, Mark, right now, who is going to close
Yeah,
us out.
thank you. Thanks so much, Dennis. I just wanted to quickly announce a couple of upcoming events for everyone's information. On November 20th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, please join us. November 20th marks the 50th anniversary of the death of Francisco Franco. I know none of us will be joining to grieve that occasion. So we're going to gather online. This is an online event. Nancy Wallach is organizing it, our longtime board member, Nancy Wallach, and we will mark that occasion by many descendants and other friends of the Alba community who will share with us their experiences earlier this year at the Jarama March in Madrid. The Jarama March is an annual event, but this year it was dedicated particularly to the North American vets. So we will hear from them about their experiences there and also their tributes and ongoing memorials to those that we honor here at Alba, the heroes of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade and the other, the 2,800 who went from America to fight fascism in Spain. Also, please note on December 7th, if you live in the New York area or you're going to be here on December 7th, it's an afternoon event at 1 p.m. Tickets will go on sale soon. This is a gathering of the Alba community, a holiday gathering. Everyone is welcome. Tickets on sale soon, so watch your emails for that. And it's going to be a very joyful gathering. Again, focusing on the grandchildren this year of the vets who will have many things to share about their ancestors and their tributes and some of the artifacts and treasures and heirlooms that they have. So please mark your calendars for that. And if you can attend, please plan to come on December 7th. I wanted to mention Alba encourages everyone, if you're in a jurisdiction where there's an election, there are several elections coming up that are, I think, of great interest to us in the Alba community coming up on Tuesday, November 4th. So if you're in a jurisdiction where there is an election, make sure you're registered and make sure you vote. I wanted to end by thanking Gina Horman, our treasurer and longtime board member. Thank her for her participation and her help in organizing this event. Thank you to my colleague, Dennis Meany, of course. Thanks to our friends and colleagues at the Center for Constitutional Rights. Thank you, all of you, for attending. And one last final thank you to our honorary board member and friend, Joyce Horman. Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
Thanks, everyone. You can see the recording of this event on our YouTube channel. It'll be up there within a day or two. Thanks.
Thank you.